Frank Davis' datapad slips from his fingers, clattering down the alien dormitory's spiraling staircase. He curses under his breath, chasing after the device. It's his lifeline on this strange world, containing vital information for his studies at Galactic University on Zephyria. The pad bounces off the last step, sliding beneath a hidden panel in the wall. Frank pushes against the panel, revealing a secret passage. He hesitates, then steps inside. The human exchange student's eyes widen as he enters a vast, dimly lit chamber. Bioluminescent bodies writhe in a complex dance, their forms intertwined in what can only be described as a ritualistic orgy. Panic erupts as an alarm blares. Eleni students scatter, their iridescent skin flashing in patterns of distress. Frank freezes, realizing he's stumbled upon something he was never meant to see. A stunningly beautiful Eleni female approaches him. Her skin shimmers with an otherworldly glow, feather-like appendages framing her alien features. "I am Flora," she says, her voice a melodic whisper. "You have witnessed our sacred breeding ritual, human." Frank's heart races as Flora explains the gravity of the situation. The Eliani face a dire fertility crisis, and this ritual is their last hope for survival. According to their laws, any outsider who witnesses the ritual must be eliminated or participate in the breeding process. "You have a choice, Frank Davis," Flora states, her eyes boring into his. "Face execution or mate with me to help save my species." Before Frank can respond, his comm device buzzes. It's the human embassy on Zephyria. Earth government has caught wind of the situation and sees an opportunity to gain leverage in galactic politics. Frank listens in disbelief as he's ordered to cooperate and mate with Flora for the sake of human-alien relations. As Frank processes this unexpected turn of events, he notices a group of Eliani watching him with hostile expressions. Flora leans in close, her breath warm against his ear. "My brother Zorn leads a faction of extremists," she whispers. "They oppose any human involvement in our gene pool. We must tread carefully." Frank's mind reels as he considers the implications. He's suddenly at the center of a potential intergalactic incident. His participation could lead to a powerful alliance between humans and Eliani, but it also risks triggering a war with the extremist faction. Flora takes his hand, her touch sending a surge of energy through his body. "There's more to us than you know," she says, demonstrating a brief telepathic connection. "Our abilities could benefit humanity in its ongoing conflicts with other aggressive races." The chamber doors seal shut as Frank reluctantly agrees to participate. Flora leads him towards the center of the room, where other Eliani participants watch with a mix of curiosity and hostility. The air crackles with tension and possibility. As Frank prepares to enter the ritual, he realizes that his actions here could shape the future of human-alien relations. The fate of two species now rests in his hands, all because of a misplaced data pad in a hidden chamber in an alien dorm. Frank took a deep breath, steadying himself as Flora led him towards the center of the room. The chamber doors sealed shut behind them with a soft hiss, cutting off any possibility of retreat. As they approached the central platform, the air around them seemed to thicken, charged with an invisible energy that made the hairs on Frank's arms stand on end. The chamber was unlike anything Frank had ever seen. Soft, pulsating light emanated from the bodies of the Eliani, casting an otherworldly glow throughout the space. The light shifted and swirled, creating patterns that seemed to dance across the walls and floor. Frank felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, his senses overwhelmed by the intense atmosphere. Flora's grip on his hand tightened, her skin cool against his. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the low hum that permeated the air. "The first moments can be disorienting for outsiders." As they stepped onto the platform, Frank became acutely aware of the other Eliani couples surrounding them. Their bodies moved in fluid, serpentine motions, intertwining in ways that defied human anatomy. Some Eliani watched Frank with undisguised curiosity, while others turned away, their bioluminescent skin flashing in patterns that he interpreted as disgust or anger. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the chamber's entrance. A group of Eliani burst through the crowd, led by a male whose feather-like appendages stood rigid with agitation. His skin pulsed with angry red and orange hues. "That's Zorn," Flora said, her body tensing beside Frank. "My brother." Zorn's voice boomed across the chamber, his words translated by Frank's comm device. "This is an abomination. We cannot allow this human to taint our sacred bloodline." His supporters cheered, their skin flashing in unison. The chamber erupted into chaos. Alani on both sides began arguing, their bioluminescent displays creating a dizzying light show. Frank felt Flora's hand slip from his as she moved to confront her brother. "Zorn, you don't understand," Flora pleaded. "This could be our only chance to save our species." Before Zorn could respond, a bright light filled the center of the chamber. A shimmering holographic image appeared, revealing an elderly Eliani female with intricate swirling patterns across her skin. "Silence!" the hologram commanded, her voice resonating with authority. The chamber fell quiet instantly. "I am Elder Lyra of the High Council. We have foreseen this moment." Her gaze fell upon Frank, who felt exposed under her scrutiny. "There is an ancient prophecy that speaks of off-world intervention, saving our species. The humans' participation will be allowed." Zorn's face contorted with rage, but he remained silent. His group retreated to the edges of the chamber, their skin pulsing with nearly unleashed anger. With the immediate threat neutralized, Flora turned back to Frank. "We must begin," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "The ritual is complex, but I will guide you through it." She led Frank to the center of the platform, where they stood facing each other. "The mating process involves an exchange of energy," Flora explained. "You must synchronize your body's electrical impulses with mine." Frank nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. As Flora began to glow more intensely, he focused on matching his breathing to hers. Gradually, he felt a tingling sensation spread through his body, starting at his fingertips and moving inward. To his astonishment, Frank's skin began to emit a faint glow. It was nothing compared to the Eliani's bioluminescence, but it was unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. "Fascinating." An Eliani with markings that Frank assumed denoted scientific expertise approached them. "I am Dr. Vex. Human, your reaction is unprecedented. It appears interaction with our biology may awaken latent abilities in your species." As Dr. Vex continued to observe, Frank and Flora's energies began to align. The world around them seemed to fade away as they entered a shared mental space. Vivid images flashed through their minds. Earth's lush forests and sprawling cities, ancient Eleni civilizations rising and falling, and hints of a long-forgotten connection between their races. Outside the chamber, word of Frank's participation spread rapidly. The streets of the alien city filled with protesters, some demanding his removal, while others celebrated the potential salvation of their species. The human embassy on Zephyria went into high alert, deploying security forces to protect their interests. Back in the ritual chamber, Frank and Flora's mating process intensified. Their shared visions became more vivid, revealing secrets long buried in both species' histories. The connection between them grew stronger, their energies intertwining in ways that defied scientific explanation. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the chamber. Frank's eyes snapped open, breaking the mental connection. Around them, chaos erupted as Eliani participants began losing control of their bioluminescent abilities. Their lights flickered erratically, some fading entirely. "What's happening?" Frank shouted over the din. Dr. Vex rushed towards them, his face contorted with worry. "Someone has introduced a virus into the air filtration system. It's disrupting our bioluminescent functions." Flora stumbled, her glow dimming. "Frank," she gasped, "we need to complete the ritual. It might be our only chance to save my people." But as panic spread through the chamber, Frank realized the virus was continuing to spread. If they stayed to complete the ritual, they risked further contamination. Yet leaving now might doom the Eliani to extinction. Time seemed to slow as Frank weighed his options. The fate of two species hung in the balance, dependent on his next move. With alarms blaring and chaos swirling around him, Frank made his decision. Frank's decision crystallized in an instant. Despite the chaos engulfing the chamber, he knew what he had to do. Meeting Flora's eyes, he nodded firmly. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice steady, despite the fear coursing through him. As alarms blared and panicked Eliani stumbled around them. Frank and Flora reconnected. The moment their hands touched, a surge of energy coursed between them, stronger than before. Their shared mental space bloomed once more, vivid and alive with possibility. Around them, the air shimmered and warped. A translucent bubble formed, enveloping them in a cocoon of pulsating energy. The sounds of the chamber muted, becoming distant and distorted. Frank felt a tingling sensation across his skin as his faint glow intensified, matching Flora's bioluminescence. Dr. Vex, who had been frantically checking other affected Eliani, turned back to Frank and Flora. His eyes widened as he observed the phenomenon. Pulling out a handheld scanner, he began taking rapid readings of the energy field. "Impossible," he muttered, tapping furiously at the device's screen. "The virus, it's not affecting them. In fact, it's being neutralized within the field." Elder Lyra's hologram flickered, her attention fixed on the unfolding scene. "Explain, Dr. Vex," she commanded. "It appears the human's physiology, combined with his newly awakened bioluminescent abilities, is producing an antibody effect against the virus," Dr. Vex reported, his voice rising with excitement. "Their combined energies are creating a protective barrier." As Frank and Flora's connection deepened, the chamber doors burst open. Zorn and his followers stormed in, their skin pulsing with angry red hues. They were met by a line of Eliani security forces, their own bioluminescence flickering erratically from the virus. "Stop this abomination," Zorn roared, pushing against the security line. Behind him, human embassy personnel arrived, adding to the chaos. But Frank and Flora were oblivious to the commotion. Their shared mental space had expanded, filled with swirling images of Earth and Zephyria. Ancient structures rose and fell, and strange symbols flashed between them. Frank felt as if he were downloading millennia of Eliani history and culture directly into his mind. Suddenly, a wave of energy burst forth from their joined forms. It swept through the chamber like a silent explosion, washing over every Eliani present. As it passed, their erratic bioluminescence stabilized, returning to its normal patterns. Dr. Vex's scanner beeped urgently. "The virus!" he exclaimed. "It's being neutralized throughout the chamber." The energy wave continued to expand, reaching the chamber's air filtration system. Lights on the control panel switched from red to green as the system began purging the last traces of the virus. As the wave dissipated, Frank felt a sudden, overwhelming fatigue. His legs buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. Flora, though weakened, managed to catch him before his head hit the ground. "Frank!" she cried, cradling his head in her lap. Her skin pulsed with concern as she looked up. "Dr. Vex, please help!" The Eliani scientist rushed over, his scanner already active. He passed it over Frank's prone form, then turned to Flora. His eyes widened as he studied the results. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The human's DNA. It's been altered. I'm detecting Eliani genetic markers intermixed with his own." Elder Lyra's hologram moved closer, her expression grave. "The ritual is complete," she announced. "Seal the chamber. No one enters or leaves until we understand the full extent of what has transpired here." As Eliani's security forces moved to secure the area, Zorn and his followers found themselves surrounded. Elder Lyra's voice rang out once more. "Zorn, you and your compatriots are under arrest for attempted sabotage. You will answer to the High Council for your actions." Outside the chamber, word of the ritual's success spread rapidly. The protests in the streets began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. However, as details of Frank's condition leaked, new concerns arose about the implications of human Eliani genetic mixing. Inside the sealed chamber, Frank stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He found himself looking up at Flora's concerned face. As their eyes met, he felt a strange connection, different from before. "Flora," he thought, not speaking aloud. Flora's eyes widened in surprise. "Frank?" her voice echoed in his mind. "How are you doing this?" Dr. Vex, noticing their silent exchange, leaned in. "What's happening?" he asked. Frank turned to the scientist, his voice weak but filled with wonder. "I can hear Flora's thoughts," he explained, "and she can hear mine." As the implications of this new development sank in, the chamber doors rattled. A voice called out from the other side. "This is Dr. Sarah Russell from the Earth Embassy. We demand access to Frank Davis immediately." Frank struggled to sit up, his head spinning with the enormity of what had transpired. He looked at Flora, then at Dr. Vex, realizing that their actions had set in motion events that would reshape not just their lives, but potentially the future of both their species. As the demands from outside grew louder, Frank took a deep breath, preparing himself for what was to come. The mating ritual was over, but he knew that the real challenges were only just beginning. The chamber doors opened with a hiss, and Dr. Sarah Russell strode in, flanked by a team of human medical personnel. "Frank Davis, we need to examine you immediately," she announced, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. Frank, still weak from the ordeal, nodded in agreement. As the human medical team approached, Dr. Vex stepped forward. "I believe it would be most beneficial if we collaborate on this examination," he suggested, holding up his scanner. "The human's physiology has undergone significant changes that require expertise from both our species." Dr. Russell hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Agreed. Let's set up a joint medical bay here in the chamber." Over the next several hours, Frank underwent a battery of tests. Blood samples were drawn, brain scans were conducted, and his newfound bioluminescent abilities were meticulously documented. Throughout the examination, Frank found himself acutely aware of Flora's presence, her thoughts a comforting whisper in the back of his mind. As the test progressed, Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell huddled over a holographic display, their expressions a mix of excitement and concern. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Russell muttered, manipulating the 3D image of Frank's DNA. "The Eliani genetic markers have fully integrated with his human genome. It's as if his DNA has been completely rewritten." Dr. Vex nodded, his skin pulsing with a mix of blue and green hues. "And yet he retains his human form. The implications are staggering." Frank, overhearing their conversation, tried to sit up. "What does this mean for me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Dr. Russell turned to him, her expression softening. "It means, Frank, that you're no longer entirely human. You're something new, a hybrid of human and Eliani." The weight of her words settled over Frank like a heavy blanket. He glanced at Flora, who had remained by his side throughout the examination. Her thoughts brushed against his, a mix of concern and excitement. "And what about Flora?" Frank asked, suddenly remembering the purpose of the ritual. "Did it work? Is she—" Before he could finish his question, Flora's skin suddenly pulsed with a brilliant, swirling pattern of blues and greens. Dr. Vex rushed to her side, scanner in hand. "Remarkable," he breathed, studying the readout. "Flora, you're pregnant. The ritual was successful." The chamber erupted into a flurry of activity as the news spread. Eliani officials conferred in hushed tones, their skin flickering with a kaleidoscope of colors. The human medical team hurried to set up additional monitoring equipment. As the initial excitement settled, Elder Lyra's hologram reappeared in the center of the chamber. Her expression was grave as she addressed the gathered crowd. "This development brings both hope and great responsibility," she intoned. "The High Council must convene immediately to discuss the implications. Until then, Frank Davis and Flora will remain under observation. No one is to leave this facility without explicit authorization." As the Elder's hologram faded, Frank felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The events of the past few hours caught up with him, and he slipped into a deep sleep. Days passed, blending into weeks as Frank and Flora remained in the quarantine facility. Their days were filled with medical examinations, tests, and interviews with both Eliani and human officials. Frank's abilities continued to develop. His skin now emitted a soft glow at will, and his telepathic connection with Flora grew stronger. One morning, as Frank practiced controlling his bioluminescence under Dr. Vex's watchful eye, an alert sounded throughout the facility. Dr. Russell rushed into the room, her face pale. "We have a situation," she announced. "The High Council has made its decision. They're allowing limited human participation in the Ileani breeding program. Frank's concentration broke, his skin dimming. What does that mean for us? He asked, gesturing between himself and Flora. Dr. Russell took a deep breath. It means you're about to become the center of a galactic controversy, Frank. The Council is establishing a joint human Ileani genetic research institute here on Zephyria. You and Flora will be the primary subjects of study. As the implications of this news sank in, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Dr. Vex's comm device chirped urgently. Security breach in the outer perimeter, a voice crackled through the speaker. Unknown assailants have infiltrated the facility. Frank's newly enhanced senses prickled with danger. He turned to Flora, who was clutching her abdomen protectively. In that moment, a vision flashed before his eyes. Multiple possible futures, each branching out from this critical juncture. As security forces scrambled to respond to the threat, Frank found himself at a crossroads. The fate of two species, and possibly the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. With alarms blaring and chaos erupting around him, Frank knew he had to make a choice that would shape the future of human-Ileani relations forever. Frank's mind raced as he weighed his options. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and he knew his next move would be crucial. Taking a deep breath, he made his decision. We need to broadcast, Frank announced, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The galaxy needs to know the truth about what's happening here. Dr. Russell nodded, her expression a mix of concern and perseverance. I'll set up the comm link. We can use the facility's emergency broadcast system. As they prepared for the transmission, the facility shook with the sound of explosions. Security forces rushed past, their weapons drawn. Intruders have breached the outer perimeter. A voice crackled over the intercom. All personnel, implement lockdown procedures immediately. Frank's newly enhanced senses tingled with danger. He turned to Flora, who was standing protectively near him, her skin pulsing with worried hues. Stay close, he thought to her, their mental link buzzing with shared anxiety. As Dr. Russell worked to establish the broadcast link, Dr. Vex's scanner began beeping urgently. Fascinating, he muttered, studying the readings. The intruders, they're using some kind of advanced cloaking technology. That's how they bypassed our outer defenses. Frank stepped in front of the makeshift camera as Dr. Russell gave him the signal. Taking a deep breath, he began to address the galaxy. People of Earth, citizens of Zephyria, and all sentient beings across the stars, I am Frank Davis. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about our place in the universe. As Frank spoke, detailing his experiences and the potential benefits of human-Ileani cooperation, Flora suddenly doubled over, her skin flashing with intense, swirling patterns. Frank, she gasped, both aloud and in his mind. Dr. Vex rushed to her side, scanner in hand. The fetus, he exclaimed. It's emitting an unprecedented energy surge. Before anyone could react, a blinding flash erupted from Flora's abdomen. The surge of energy washed over the room, disrupting the broadcast signal and plunging the facility into darkness. In the chaos that followed, Frank heard the sound of shattering glass and unfamiliar voices. His heart raced as he realized the intruders had taken advantage of the blackout to breach their location. Protect the hybrid, a gruff voice shouted, and secure the Ileani female. Acting on instinct, Frank concentrated, willing his skin to glow. A soft blue light emanated from his body, illuminating the room. He saw a group of armed figures, a mix of humans and Ileani, advancing towards them. Stay back, Frank warned, stepping between the intruders and Flora. Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell worked frantically to stabilize Flora's condition as the extremists closed in. Suddenly, Frank's vision blurred, and he saw multiple potential outcomes flash before his eyes. In one, the attackers overwhelmed them. In another, Flora's pregnancy destabilized, releasing a catastrophic energy burst. Focusing on the most favorable outcome, Frank raised his hands. To his surprise, a shimmering barrier of bioluminescent energy formed around Flora and the medical team. The attackers hesitated, momentarily stunned by the display of hybrid abilities. In that moment of confusion, the facility's security forces, led by a tall, imposing Eliani officer, burst into the room. "I am Commander Zax," the officer announced, his skin pulsing with authoritative shades of blue and silver. "Surrender now, or face the consequences of your actions." The room erupted into chaos as the security forces engaged the intruders. Energy weapons flashed, filling the air with the acrid smell of ozone. Frank, driven by an overwhelming need to protect Flora and their unborn child, felt a surge of power within him. Instinctively, he thrust his hands forward. Pulses of energy, similar to those emitted by Flora's pregnancy, shot from his palms, striking two of the attackers and sending them crashing into the wall. As the firefight intensified, a stray energy blast struck the medical equipment monitoring Flora's pregnancy. The fetus reacted immediately, emitting a powerful pulse that rippled through the room. Everyone except Frank and Flora collapsed, rendered unconscious by the surge. In the sudden silence that followed, Frank rushed to Flora's side. "Are you all right?" he asked, both aloud and through their mental link. Flora nodded weakly, her skin pulsing with exhaustion and relief. "The baby," she whispered. "It protected us." Before Frank could respond, the facility's main doors slid open. A delegation of regal-looking beings entered, their expressions a mix of shock and awe as they surveyed the scene. "The Galactic Council," Dr. Vex groaned, regaining consciousness. They weren't supposed to arrive for another week. As the council members took in the aftermath of the battle and the lingering effects of the hybrid energy pulse, Frank realized that the situation had escalated far beyond anything he could have imagined. The future of human-Eliani relations, and perhaps the entire galaxy, now rested on what would happen next. One of the unconscious attackers stirred, catching Frank's attention. As security forces moved to restrain him, Frank recognized the face beneath the mask. It was Drax, a high-ranking Eliani official he had met during the early days of the human-Eliani negotiations. Commander Zax, now back on his feet, approached Frank and Flora. "We've secured the facility," he reported, "but this attack, it's part of something bigger. We've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy involving both human isolationists and Eliani separatists." As the implications of this revelation sank in, Dr. Russell and Dr. Vex huddled together, excitedly discussing something on their shared datapad. "Frank," Dr. Russell called out, her voice filled with excitement, "we think we've figured out how your transformation occurred. This could be the key to expanding the breeding program." Frank looked from the scientists to the Galactic Council members, then to Flora, who was protectively cradling her abdomen. He realized that the events of the past few hours had set in motion changes that would reshape the future of both their species, and possibly the entire galaxy. As news of the attack spread and reports of Frank's enhanced abilities began to circulate, the facility's communication system lit up with incoming messages. Both humans and Eliani were expressing interest in the breeding program, seeing it as a potential path to evolution and greater influence in galactic affairs. The leader of the Galactic Council stepped forward, her expression grave. "In light of these extraordinary events, we are calling an emergency session to address the human-Eliani hybrid situation. Mr. Davis, we request that you and your mate testify before the council." Frank nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. As he prepared to face the Galactic Council and shape the future of interspecies relations, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises his unique physiology and the rapidly developing hybrid child might have in store. As he turned to face the Galactic Council leader, a sudden gasp from Flora caught everyone's attention. "Frank," she whispered, her skin pulsing with vibrant hues of blue and purple. "It's happening." Dr. Vex rushed to Flora's side, his scanner already in hand. "The fetus, its development has accelerated exponentially," he announced, his voice a mix of excitement and concern. Without hesitation, Dr. Russell took charge. "We need to move her to the specialized birthing chamber immediately," she ordered, gesturing to the medical team. As they hurried Flora onto a hover stretcher, Frank felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. His newfound abilities allowed him to sense the intense fluctuations emanating from Flora's abdomen. "I'm coming with you," he said firmly, taking Flora's hand as they moved swiftly through the facility's corridors. Commander Zax fell into step beside them, his skin flickering with shades of alertness. "I'll coordinate security," he said. "We can't risk any further attacks during this critical moment." The birthing chamber was a marvel of human and Eleni technology. As they entered, Frank marveled at the array of pulsing lights and holographic displays surrounding a central pod designed to accommodate Flora's unique physiology. Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell worked in perfect sync, their movements precise as they prepared for the unprecedented event. Frank stood by Flora's side, his heart racing as he watched her skin glow with increasing intensity. "The energy output is off the charts," Dr. Russell muttered, her eyes fixed on a holographic readout. "We need to stabilize it before it overloads our systems." As if on cue, the lights in the chamber flickered ominously. Frank felt a pull from deep within, an instinct he couldn't explain. Without thinking, he placed his hands on Flora's abdomen, his own skin beginning to glow in response. "Frank, what are you doing?" Dr. Vex asked, his voice tinged with alarm. I'm not sure," Frank replied, focusing on the connection he felt with Flora and their unborn child. "But I think I can help." As Frank concentrated, his bioluminescence intensified, matching Flora's output. The erratic energy spikes on the monitors began to stabilize, settling into a more manageable rhythm. "Incredible," Dr. Russell breathed. "He's acting as a sort of biological regulator." Outside the birthing chamber, chaos erupted. The facility's power systems, strained by the intense energy output, began to fail. Emergency klaxons blared as backup generators kicked in. Commander Zax's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've got crowds gathering outside the facility. Some supporters, some protesters. Security is maintaining a perimeter, but the situation is tense." Dr. Vex nodded grimly. "We need to focus on the task at hand. This birth could change everything." As Flora's labor intensified, Frank felt a surge of emotions through their mental link. Fear, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of love flowed between them. He squeezed her hand, sending waves of reassurance. "You're doing great," he said aloud, his voice steady despite the tumult around them. Suddenly, Flora's body arched, her skin blazing with light so bright it was almost painful to look at. Frank instinctively intensified his own glow, channeling the excess energy away from the sensitive equipment. With a final tremendous pulse of energy that momentarily plunged the entire facility into darkness, Flora gave birth. As the backup generators hummed to life, casting the room in an eerie, pulsating glow, Frank heard a sound that made his heart soar: the cry of their newborn child. Dr. Russell carefully lifted the infant, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's a girl," she announced, her voice filled with awe. As Frank gazed upon his daughter for the first time, he was struck by her unique beauty. Her skin shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow, a perfect blend of human and Eleni characteristics. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, seemed to hold the wisdom of the cosmos. Dr. Vex approached with a scanner, his movements cautious. "The initial readings are extraordinary," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Her genetic structure, her energy signature, they're unlike anything we've ever seen." As the medical team worked to ensure the health of both Flora and the newborn, Frank felt a wave of protective instinct wash over him. He knew deep in his core that their daughter's birth would send shock waves through the galaxy. The challenges they had faced so far were only the beginning. Commander Zax entered the chamber, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "The news is spreading fast," he reported. "We're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council is calling for an immediate summit." Frank looked down at his daughter, then at Flora, who gazed back at him with tired but joyful eyes. He knew they stood at a crossroads, not just for themselves, but for the future of human-Eliani relations, and perhaps the entire galactic community. As he cradled his newborn daughter, feeling the gentle pulse of her nascent abilities, Frank realized that their greatest challenge lay ahead. They would need to navigate the treacherous waters of galactic politics while protecting their child from those who would seek to exploit her unique gifts. The birthing chamber, once a sanctuary, now felt like the eye of a storm. Beyond its walls, Frank could sense the gathering forces, scientists eager to study their daughter, politicians seeking to control her fate, and perhaps most worryingly, those who saw her very existence as a threat. As if sensing his thoughts, the infant in his arms stirred, her tiny hand reaching up to touch his face. In that moment of connection, Frank saw flashes of potential futures, glimpses of the extraordinary journey that lay ahead. Dr. Vex approached, his scanner still humming. "We need to begin a comprehensive study of her abilities," he said, his voice filled with nearly unleashed excitement. "The implications for interspecies genetic research are staggering." Frank nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. He knew that staying within the confines of the research program would offer protection, but it would also mean a life under constant scrutiny. The alternative, to flee, to try and raise their daughter away from the prying eyes of the galaxy, was fraught with its own dangers. As he contemplated their options, Frank felt a gentle probe in his mind. Flora, still resting in the birthing pod, reached out to him telepathically. Their silent communication spoke volumes, conveying fears, hopes, and the unshakable bond they now shared as a family. The decision they would make in the coming hours would shape not only their lives but potentially the course of galactic history. As Frank looked down at his daughter's face, peaceful despite the chaos surrounding her birth, he knew that whatever path they chose, their journey was only beginning. Frank held Nova close, marveling at the perfect blend of human and Eliani features in her tiny face. The moment of peace was short-lived, however, as the door to the birthing chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Elder Lyra of the Eleni High Council entered, her luminescent skin pulsing with urgency. Her eyes widened as they fell upon Nova, and she approached with measured steps. "Mr. Davis, Flora," she said, her voice a mix of awe and concern. "I come bearing news of great importance." Frank felt Flora's anxiety spike through their mental link. He gently placed Nova in her arms before turning to face the elder. "What is it?" he asked, bracing himself for the worst. Elder Lyra's skin flickered with shades of blue and violet as she spoke. "Your daughter, she's emitting energy signatures unlike anything we've ever encountered. They're detectable across vast distances of space." The implications hit Frank like a physical blow. He exchanged a glance with Flora, whose arms tightened protectively around Nova. "You mean?" Frank began, his voice trailing off as he struggled to articulate the sudden shift in their reality. "Keeping her hidden is no longer an option," Elder Lyra confirmed, her tone grave. As if on cue, Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell burst into the room, their faces flushed with excitement. "We've made a breakthrough," Dr. Russell exclaimed, brandishing a datapad. "Nova's genetic makeup, it's extraordinary. She can access and manipulate a form of energy we've never seen before." Dr. Vex nodded enthusiastically. "We're calling it Novum. The potential applications are staggering. Faster than light travel, instantaneous communication across galaxies, even terraforming dead worlds." The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over them. Frank's mind raced, calculating the far-reaching consequences of their daughter's abilities. Commander Zax's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the tension. "We've got incoming transmissions from Earth, the Galactic Council, and the Eliani High Council. They're all demanding custody of Nova." Frank felt a surge of protective instinct. He moved closer to Flora and Nova, his skin beginning to glow with a faint, pulsating light. "We need to move," he said, his voice low and determined. "This facility isn't safe anymore." As if to confirm his words, alarms began to blare throughout the complex. Commander Zax's voice came through again, this time tinged with urgency. "We've detected multiple breaches in our outer defenses. It's a coordinated attack. Professional mercenaries by the looks of it." Frank's military instincts kicked in. "Who are they?" he demanded. "Unknown," Zax replied, "but they're well-equipped and moving fast. I'm implementing emergency protocols now." The room erupted into action. Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell began frantically backing up their research data, while Elder Lyra conferred with unseen colleagues through her personal communicator. Frank turned to Flora, their eyes meeting in silent communication. He felt her fear, but also her dedication. Nova stirred in her arms, her tiny face scrunching up as if sensing the tension around her. Suddenly, Flora gasped. Frank watched in amazement as her skin began to ripple and change, taking on a more iridescent quality that closely matched Nova's. "Frank," she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "I can feel her. It's like we're connected on a whole new level." Before Frank could respond, the door burst open. Commander Zax rushed in, his skin flashing with alert patterns. "We've identified the attackers," he reported breathlessly. "They're mercenaries working for Stellar Dynamics, a major intergalactic corporation. They're after Nova." Frank's mind raced through their options. Stay and fight? Attempt an escape? Or take the risk of using the experimental teleportation technology Dr. Vex had mentioned earlier? As if reading his thoughts, Dr. Vex spoke up. "The teleporter is prepped and ready. It's risky, but it might be our best chance to get Nova to safety." Frank looked at Flora, who nodded almost imperceptibly. He turned back to the others, his decision made. "We'll take that chance," he said firmly, "but we go together, as a family." Just then, the facility shook with a massive explosion. The lights flickered, and Frank could hear the sounds of combat drawing nearer. "We're out of time, Sir, Commander Zax announced, drawing his weapon. "Whatever you're going to do, do it now." As they moved toward the teleportation chamber, Frank felt a sudden spike of energy. He turned to see Nova, her eyes wide open, emitting a soft, pulsating glow. The air around them began to shimmer and warp. "Frank," Flora called out, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and awe. "I think she's trying to protect us." The energy field around Nova expanded rapidly, enveloping Frank, Flora, and the others in the room. Outside, they could hear shouts of confusion as the attacking forces encountered an invisible barrier. Frank realized that in this moment of crisis, Nova's powers were manifesting in ways they couldn't have predicted. As the energy field pulsed around them, he knew that their journey was not nearly finished. In fact, it was just beginning. With the sounds of battle drawing closer and the fate of humanity and all alien species hanging in the balance, Frank, Flora, and Nova stood at the center of the storm. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Together. As the energy field pulsed around them, Frank felt a sudden shift in the air. The protective bubble generated by Nova began to flicker and waver, its iridescent surface growing thin and translucent. "It's dissipating," Flora whispered, her arms tightening around their daughter. With a final, shimmering pulse, the energy field collapsed entirely. Frank blinked, his eyes adjusting to the harsh reality that rushed in to fill the void. They were surrounded. Commander Zax's security forces formed a tight perimeter around them, their weapons raised defensively. Beyond them, Frank could see the gleaming armor of Captain Krell's mercenaries, their eyes locked on Nova with predatory intent. A third group, bearing the insignia of the Galactic Council, stood at attention behind a tall, willowy figure Frank recognized as Ambassador Zan. The air crackled with tension as each faction sized up the others, fingers hovering over triggers. Frank's mind raced, searching for a way out of this powder keg. Suddenly, a low, resonant hum filled the air. The concrete floor beneath their feet began to vibrate, and Frank looked up to see a massive shadow falling over the facility. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as an enormous ship appeared in the sky, its sleek, otherworldly design unlike anything Frank had ever seen. Before anyone could react, a brilliant beam of light engulfed Frank, Flora, and Nova. Frank felt a strange, tingling sensation, and then the world around them dissolved into a blur of color and light. When Frank's vision cleared, he found himself standing in a vast circular chamber. The walls seemed to pulse with an inner light, and strange, organic-looking consoles dotted the perimeter. At the center of the room stood a tall, ethereal being with skin that shimmered like starlight. "Welcome," the being said, its voice resonating in Frank's mind rather than his ears. "I am Zephyr, an elder of the progenitors. We have been waiting a long time for this moment." Frank stepped protectively in front of Flora and Nova. "Who are you? What do you want with us?" Zephyr's form rippled as if in amusement. "We are the architects of your existence, Frank Davis. Both human and Eliani life are the result of our grand experiment in evolution, seeded on Earth in Zephyria eons ago. Your daughter Nova represents the culmination of that experiment. As Zephyr spoke, images flooded Frank's mind. Ancient starships seeding primordial worlds, the slow march of evolution, and finally the convergence of human and Eliani DNA in Nova's unique form. Flora gasped, her eyes wide. You're saying you created both our species? Zephyr nodded, its form shifting like a living constellation. And now, we offer you a choice. You can return to the conflict below, or join us in our hidden sanctuary among the stars. There, Nova can grow and develop her abilities safely, away from those who would exploit her. Frank's mind reeled at the implications. Before he could respond, Nova stirred in Flora's arms. The infant's eyes opened, glowing with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, Frank's mind was filled with vivid visions, possible futures unfolding before him like a tapestry of light. He saw Nova growing up in the progenitor's sanctuary, her powers expanding beyond imagination. He saw her return to a galaxy torn apart by war, her very existence a catalyst for conflict. He saw peace, hard-won through understanding and cooperation. He saw devastation on a cosmic scale. As the visions faded, Frank became aware of a commotion on the ship's viewscreen. The scene below had erupted into chaos. Captain Krell's mercenaries had launched an all-out assault on the facility, while Commander Zax's forces fought desperately to repel them. In the midst of the battle, Frank caught glimpses of Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell working frantically at a console, their faces grim with grit. Zephyr's voice cut through Frank's thoughts. There is more at stake than you realize. A genetically engineered virus, designed to target human Eliani hybrids, is en route to Zephyria. It is hidden aboard a civilian transport ship, part of a plan by extremist factions to eliminate the threat posed by your daughter and any like her. Frank's blood ran cold. He looked at Flora, seeing his own fear and uncertainty reflected in her eyes. Nova cooed softly, seemingly oblivious to the weight of the galaxy now resting on her tiny shoulders. We must decide quickly, Flora said, her voice steady despite the tremor Frank felt through their mental link. Do we stay here, where Nova will be safe but separated from both our peoples? Or do we return and face this threat, knowing the danger it poses to our daughter? Frank's mind raced, weighing their options. The sanctuary offered safety, but at the cost of abandoning their friends and potentially altering the course of galactic history. Returning meant facing immense danger, but also the chance to shape a future where humans and Eliani could coexist peacefully. As if sensing the gravity of the moment, Nova's skin began to glow softly. Frank felt a gentle probe in his mind, not just from Flora, but from Nova as well. In that moment of connection, he understood that whatever choice they made, they would face it as a family. Frank took a deep breath, looking from Flora to Nova, then back to Zephyr. The fate of two species, perhaps the entire galaxy, hung on their next words. With the battle raging below and the virus-laden ship drawing ever closer, Frank opened his mouth to speak their decision. Decision. The weight of two worlds pressed upon him, yet in that moment of connection with Flora and Nova, clarity emerged. We have to go back, Frank said, his voice steady despite the gravity of their choice. Our family might be the key to preventing this catastrophe. Flora nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and purpose. Together, she whispered, holding Nova close. Zephyr's form shimmered with what seemed like approval. As you wish, we will provide you with tools to aid in your task. A panel on the chamber wall slid open, revealing an array of sleek, otherworldly devices. Frank and Flora approached, marveling at the advanced technology. Zephyr's voice resonated in their minds, explaining the function of each item. As Frank secured the last piece of progenitor tech, the ship began its descent. The viewscreen showed the chaos below, the battle frozen in a moment of confusion as the massive vessel appeared in the sky. Are you ready? Frank asked, looking at Flora and Nova. Flora took a deep breath, adjusting her hold on their daughter. As ready as we'll ever be. With a nod to Zephyr, Frank activated the teleportation device. The world around them dissolved into a cascade of light and energy. When their vision cleared, they found themselves at the heart of the conflict, surrounded by the protective bubble of progenitor technology. The sudden appearance of the family brought the battle to a standstill. All eyes turned to Frank, Flora, and Nova, weapons lowering in a collective moment of uncertainty. Commander Zax was the first to break the silence, rushing towards them with urgency etched on his face. "Frank, Flora, thank the stars you're back. We have a situation." "The virus," Frank interjected, his mind racing with the information Zephyr had shared. "We know. How much time do we have?" Zax's eyes widened in surprise. "Hours at most. How did you—" "No time to explain." Frank cut him off, scanning the area. He spotted Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell huddled over a console, their faces lined with stress. "We need to use the communication array to broadcast a neutralizing signal. It's our best shot at stopping this thing." As Frank outlined the plan, Ambassador Zan stepped forward, his willowy form a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "This threat transcends our individual agendas," he announced, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Captain Krell, I propose a temporary alliance. The virus poses a greater danger than any potential gain from this conflict." Krell, his armor dented and scorched, considered for a moment before nodding gruffly. "Agreed. My men will stand down." With the uneasy truce established, the disparate groups converged on the facility's main control room. Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell immediately set to work, their hands flying over the consoles as they integrated the progenitor technology with the existing systems. "The virus ship has entered the atmosphere," Elder Lyra announced, her voice tense as she monitored the incoming data. "We're running out of time." As if in response to the mounting tension, Nova began to glow. The air around her shimmered with Novum energy, creating localized fields that enhanced the abilities of those nearby. Dr. Vex gasped as his fingers moved with newfound speed and precision across the keyboard. "This is incredible," he muttered, his eyes wide with wonder. "Nova's energy is amplifying our capabilities." Frank, observing the effect, had a sudden inspiration. "Flora," he said, turning to his wife, "I think we can help. If we combine our abilities with Nova's, we might be able to create a larger energy field. It could slow down the virus ship, buy us more time." Flora nodded, understanding immediately. They moved to the center of the room, forming a tight circle with Nova at its heart. As they focused their newfound powers, the Novum energy expanded, rippling outward in waves of iridescent light. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The energy field engulfed the entire facility, stretching beyond to encompass the surrounding area. On the monitors, they watched as the incoming ship's progress visibly slowed, its engines straining against the invisible barrier. "It's working," Dr. Russell exclaimed, her fingers flying over the controls. "We've bought ourselves a few extra minutes. The neutralizing signal is almost ready." The room hummed with frantic activity as the final adjustments were made. Frank could feel the strain of maintaining the energy field, his connection with Flora and Nova the only thing keeping him upright. "Virus ship breaching the outer layer of the Novum field," Commander Zax reported, his voice tense. Dr. Vex's hand hovered over the activation switch. "Neutralizing signal ready. Initiating broadcast. Now." A pulse of energy surged through the facility as the signal went out. On the monitors, they watched as it engulfed the incoming ship. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then slowly, the ship's erratic flight pattern began to stabilize. "It's working," Dr. Russell cried out, her eyes fixed on the readouts. "The virus is being neutralized." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but it was short-lived. Alarms began to blare as the facility's systems overloaded from the massive energy output. "Power surge detected," Commander Zax shouted over the din. "We're looking at a potential meltdown." Frank looked at Flora, a silent understanding passing between them. Without a word, they redoubled their efforts, channeling the overflowing energy through their Novum connection. The room filled with a blinding light as they fought to contain the cascading reactions. When the light faded and the alarms finally fell silent, Frank found himself on his knees, exhausted but alive. Around them, the facility lay in ruins, most of its advanced technology reduced to smoldering wreckage. As the dust settled, Frank surveyed the scene. The immediate threat had been averted, but the cost had been high. The destruction of the facility's technology had leveled the playing field, leaving no faction with a clear advantage. Captain Krell approached, his expression unreadable behind his cracked visor. "I've seen a lot in my time," he said gruffly, "but nothing like this. Whatever game we were playing before, the rules have changed." Ambassador Zan nodded in agreement. "Indeed, the Galactic Council will need to reassess its stance on human-Eliani hybrid research. This event cannot be ignored." As the various groups began to disperse, Frank found himself standing with Flora and Nova amidst the wreckage of the lab. The immediate danger had passed, but he knew their journey was just getting started. Nova stirred in Flora's arms, her eyes wide and curious, seemingly unaware of the monumental shifts her very existence had triggered. "What now?" Flora asked softly, her gaze meeting Frank's. Before he could respond, a faint beep emanated from one of the few functioning consoles. Dr. Vex, his lab coat tattered and singed, rushed over to investigate. "It's a transmission," he called out, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Origin unknown, but the signal, it's like nothing I've ever seen before." Frank and Flora exchanged a look, both knowing that whatever came next would shape not just their family's future, but potentially the fate of the entire galaxy. As they moved to join Dr. Vex at the console, Nova's skin began to glow once more, a silent testament to the challenges and wonders that lay ahead. As they moved to join Dr. Vex at the console, Nova's skin began to glow once more, a silent testament to the challenges and wonders that lay ahead. The mysterious transmission crackled through the damaged speakers, filling the room with an otherworldly static. Dr. Vex's fingers danced across the controls, working to clean up the signal. Suddenly, a clear voice emerged. "To the beings of Eden Prime, we extend an invitation." Frank and Flora exchanged puzzled glances. "Eden Prime?" Frank mouthed silently. The voice continued. "The Galactic Council recognizes the potential of human-Eliani cooperation. We propose the establishment of a new colony on a neutral world, where your research can continue unimpeded." As the message played out, detailing the unique properties of Eden Prime and its suitability for both human and Eliani physiology, Frank felt a surge of hope. This could be the fresh start they needed, a chance to build something truly remarkable. In the weeks that followed, Frank and Flora found themselves at the center of intense preparations. The destruction of the research facility had leveled the playing field, and now all factions were eager to be part of this new venture. On the day of their departure, Frank stood on the launch pad, watching as colonists from various species boarded the massive transport ships. Flora approached, carrying Nova, who was now able to toddle short distances on her own. "Ready for our next adventure?" Flora asked, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her voice. Frank nodded, taking in the bustling scene around them. "As ready as we'll ever be." The journey to Eden Prime was uneventful, giving the colonists time to prepare for the challenges ahead. As their ship entered the planet's atmosphere, Frank and Flora gasped at the sight below. Vast plains of shimmering purple grass stretched to the horizon, broken only by towering crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with inner light. The colony's initial setup was a whirlwind of activity. Frank found himself working alongside Commander Zax, now head of Eden Prime's security, to establish defensive perimeters and train a multi-species security force. Flora, meanwhile, dove into the diplomatic side of things, liaising with Ambassador Zan to navigate the complex political landscape surrounding their new home. Months flew by, and Eden Prime began to take shape. The centerpiece of the colony was a state-of-the-art research facility built with a combination of Earth, Eleni, and progenitor technology. Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell wasted no time in setting up their labs, eager to continue their study of Nova and Novum energy. As Nova grew, so did her abilities. Frank watched in awe as his daughter, now a precocious toddler, manipulated small objects with her mind, creating shimmering fields of Novum energy at will. Her accelerated development was both a source of pride and concern for her parents. One afternoon, as Frank supervised a training exercise for the colony's defense force, he received an urgent call from Dr. Vex. Racing to the research facility, he found Flora already there, her face a mixture of worry and excitement. What's going on? Frank asked, slightly out of breath. Dr. Vex gestured to a holographic display showing a complex network of interconnected particles. We've made a breakthrough in understanding Nova's abilities. It appears she can manipulate quantum entanglement on a macroscopic scale. Flora, seeing Frank's confused expression, explained, "It means she might be able to revolutionize interstellar communication and transportation. This could change everything, Frank." As the implications of this discovery sank in, Frank felt a familiar unease. He knew that such a powerful ability would attract attention, not all of it welcome. His concerns were justified when, just days later, Commander Zax reported unusual activity on the outskirts of the colony. "We've detected unauthorized scans of our defenses," Zax reported grimly, "and there are rumors of new arrivals asking too many questions about Nova and the research facility." Frank's military instincts kicked in. "Increase security protocols," he ordered, "and let's accelerate the training of our defense force. I have a feeling we're going to need them." As Eden Prime grew, so did its reputation. More human Eliani couples arrived, volunteering for the hybrid breeding program. The success stories spread across the galaxy, inspiring others but also drawing the ire of those opposed to interspecies relationships. One morning, as Frank and Flora were reviewing plans for the upcoming Galactic Symposium, an alarm blared through the colony. Racing to the command center, they found Commander Zax coordinating a response to an attack on a supply ship. "It's a group calling themselves Purity Front," Zax explained, his face grim. "They're opposed to the hybrid program and seem intent on disrupting our operations." Frank felt a chill run down his spine. He had hoped they could avoid conflict here on Eden Prime, but it seemed the galaxy's divisions had followed them even to this new world. As they worked to secure the colony and protect their research, Frank and Flora knew that the real challenges were just beginning. With Nova's powers growing, enemies closing in, and the eyes of the galaxy upon them, the future of Eden Prime, and perhaps the entire galactic community, hung in the balance. In the nursery of their home, Nova played with floating orbs of Novum energy, blissfully unaware of the forces converging around her. Frank and Flora watched their daughter, steeling themselves for the trials ahead. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as a family and as the pioneers of a new era in human-Eliani relations. The mysterious transmission from Eden Prime had set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the future of human-Eliani relations. As Frank and Flora settled into their new life on the planet, they found themselves at the center of a grand experiment in interspecies cooperation. Months flew by as the colony took shape. The purple plains of Eden Prime soon bustled with activity as researchers, diplomats, and colonists from various species worked together to build a new society. At the heart of it all stood the state-of-the-art research facility where Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell continued their groundbreaking work on novum energy and hybrid physiology. As the date of the Galactic Symposium approached, Frank and Flora found themselves working tirelessly to prepare. They spent long hours coordinating with Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell, fine-tuning presentations and ensuring every aspect of the colony's progress was documented for the visiting delegates. One evening, as they reviewed their notes for the keynote address, Nova toddled into the room. At 3 years old, she was already displaying remarkable abilities. With a wave of her small hand, she lifted a data pad from the table, surrounding it with a shimmering field of novum energy. "Nova, sweetie," Flora said gently, "remember what we talked about? We need to be careful with our powers." Nova's brow furrowed in concentration as she slowly lowered the data pad back to the table. Frank watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and concern. Their daughter's abilities were growing rapidly, and he knew they needed to help her learn control. As the first delegates began to arrive on Eden Prime, the colony buzzed with excitement. Ships from Earth, Zephyria, and dozens of other worlds filled the skies, bringing dignitaries eager to witness the progress of the hybrid research program. Frank stood at the spaceport, greeting a group of Eliani scientists when Commander Zax approached, his expression serious. "Frank, we need to talk," Zax said in a low voice. "I've detected some unusual activity within the colony. Unauthorized access attempts, strange energy fluctuations. Something's not right." Frank nodded, his military instincts kicking in. Increase security protocols. I want every inch of this colony scanned and monitored. We can't afford any surprises during the symposium. As they implemented the new security measures, neither Frank nor Zax realized that their actions were forcing a hidden threat to accelerate its plans. Deep within the colony, Lyra Vex, a stellar dynamics operative and Dr. Vex's estranged sister, gathered her team for a final briefing. Our window of opportunity is closing, Lyra told her agents. We moved during the opening ceremony. Failure is not an option. The day of the symposium arrived, and Eden Prime's main conference center was a hive of activity. Frank and Flora stood backstage, reviewing their notes one last time before their keynote address. Nova sat nearby, playing with small orbs of Novum energy under Dr. Russell's watchful eye. Suddenly, Nova's eyes widened, and the energy orbs dissipated. "Mama, Papa," she said, her voice trembling. "Something bad is coming." Before Frank could respond, a series of explosions rocked the building. Screams and shouts filled the air as panic spread through the gathered delegates. Frank's training kicked in immediately. "Flora, get Nova to safety," he shouted over the chaos. "I'll help evacuate the delegates." As Flora scooped up Nova and ran for the secure area, Frank pushed through the panicked crowd, using his hybrid abilities to create a Novum energy shield to protect fleeing delegates from falling debris. In the secure area, Dr. Russell worked frantically to calm Nova, whose distress was causing her Novum field to fluctuate wildly. Small objects around the room began to levitate and spin as Nova's powers surged out of control. Outside, Lyra Vex and her team moved swiftly through the chaos, disabling security systems and fighting their way toward their target. As they approached the secure area, they found their path blocked by a shimmering wall of Novum energy. Frank stood before them, his hands glowing with power. "You're not getting anywhere near my daughter," he growled. Lyra's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, brother-in-law," she said, her own hands beginning to glow. "You have no idea what you're up against." As Frank and Lyra clashed in a spectacular display of Novum-enhanced combat, Flora worked with Commander Zax to coordinate the colony's defense. She tapped into the facility's communication system, her voice ringing out over the speakers. "Attention all security personnel," she called. "This is a code red situation. Protect the delegates and secure all research data. We are under attack." In the skies above Eden Prime, a sleek ship of unfamiliar design descended rapidly. Inside, Zephyr and his team of progenitors prepared to intervene, their advanced Novum-powered technology humming to life. As the battle raged across the colony, Nova's powers continued to grow. In the secure room, Dr. Russell watched in awe as the young girl's Novum field expanded, pulsing with energy. "Nova," Dr. Russell said softly, "I need you to focus. Remember what your parents taught you about control." Nova closed her eyes, her small face scrunched in concentration. The erratic energy field around her began to stabilize, taking on a more coherent form. Outside, Frank and Lyra's duel had reached a fever pitch. Bolts of Novum energy crackled between them as they fought, their enhanced abilities pushing them to the limits of human endurance. "Why are you doing this?" Frank demanded, deflecting a blast of energy. "What does stellar dynamics want with Nova?" Lyra laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. "You have no idea of the power you're dealing with," she spat. "Nova is the key to everything. With her abilities, we could reshape the galaxy." As their battle intensified, neither combatant noticed the subtle change in the air around them. A faint shimmer began to spread across the colony, emanating from the secure area where Nova was being kept. Inside the room, Nova opened her eyes, which now glowed with an otherworldly light. "I can feel everyone," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Dr. Russell felt a strange sensation wash over her, as if her mind was suddenly expanding. She gasped as she realized what was happening. "Nova," she breathed, "you're creating a quantum entanglement field." The shimmering field expanded rapidly, engulfing the entire colony. For a brief moment, every mind on Eden Prime was connected, thoughts and emotions flowing freely between humans, Eleni, and every other species present. In that instant of shared consciousness, the full scope of Stellar Dynamics' plan was laid bare for all to see. Lyra's true motivations, The extent of her organization's reach and the danger they posed to galactic stability were exposed to every inhabitant of Eden Prime. But the quantum entanglement had another unexpected effect. Throughout the colony, human Eliani couples suddenly found themselves awakening to new abilities. Novum energy crackled to life in the hands of dozens of individuals, their latent hybrid powers activated by Nova's incredible display of power. As the entanglement faded, the battle's tide turned dramatically. Newly empowered hybrids joined the colony's defenders, their combined abilities quickly overwhelming stellar dynamics forces. Lyra, realizing her defeat was imminent, made a desperate lunge towards the secure area. But Frank, his own powers amplified by the quantum event, intercepted her with a massive surge of novum energy. The blast sent Lyra crashing into a wall where she slumped unconscious. As the last of the stellar dynamics agents were rounded up, Frank rushed to the secure area. He found Flora already there, holding Nova close as Dr. Russell ran scans on the exhausted child. "Is she okay?" Frank asked, his voice thick with concern. Flora nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and worry. "She's fine, just tired." But Frank, what she did, it's changed everything. As the family embraced, the implications of Nova's actions began to ripple outward. The symposium, thrown into chaos by the attack, now faced an entirely new set of challenges and opportunities. The emergence of widespread hybrid abilities had altered the course of human-Eliani relations in ways no one could have predicted. Outside the secure area, Commander Zax approached, his usually stoic face showing signs of strain. "Frank, Flora," he said, "we've got a situation. The progenitors have landed, and they're requesting a meeting with you and Nova. They say it's time for some answers." Frank and Flora exchanged a look, knowing that the next few hours would shape not just their family's future, but potentially the fate of the entire galaxy. As they prepared to face this new challenge, Nova stirred in Flora's arms, her eyes fluttering open. "Mama, Papa," she murmured, "I saw everything. There's so much more to learn." With those words, Frank and Flora realized that their journey, far from being over, was only just beginning. Frank and Flora exchanged a determined look, knowing that the challenges ahead would test them in ways they had never imagined. As the dust settled from stellar dynamics attack, Eden Prime began to rebuild. The colony, once a tentative experiment in human-Eliani cooperation, now stood as a beacon of hope for interspecies collaboration. The quantum entanglement event had changed everything, awakening latent hybrid abilities in many colonists and fundamentally altering the course of galactic relations. Over the next 5 years, Eden Prime flourished. The colony's population swelled as hybrid couples and researchers from across the galaxy flocked to this new center of scientific discovery and cultural exchange. Frank and Flora found themselves at the heart of this transformation, working tirelessly to build a society that embraced the unique strengths of both humans and Eliani. Nova, now a teenager, had grown into her abilities with remarkable grace. Her control over novum energy surpassed even the most optimistic projections of Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell. Together, they delved into the mysteries of quantum entanglement, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. On a crisp morning in Eden Prime's research facility, Nova stood before a complex array of equipment, her eyes closed in concentration. Dr. Vex and Dr. Russell monitored the readouts with rapt attention. "Incredible," Dr. Vex murmured, his antennae twitching with excitement. "The quantum field is stabilizing at a rate we've never seen before." Nova's hands moved in intricate patterns, weaving strands of novum energy into a shimmering tapestry. Suddenly, a vivid point of light appeared in the center of the room, expanding rapidly into a swirling vortex. Dr. Russell's eyes widened. "Nova, what's happening?" Nova opened her eyes, her expression a mixture of surprise and wonder. "I can feel it, a connection to somewhere else, somewhere far away." Before anyone could react, alarms blared throughout the facility. Commander Zax's voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention all personnel. We're detecting a massive spatial anomaly in orbit. All non-essential staff, evacuate immediately." Frank and Flora burst into the lab, their faces etched with concern. "Nova, are you all right?" Flora asked, rushing to her daughter's side. Nova nodded, her eyes still fixed on the swirling vortex. I'm fine, Mom, but I think I just created a wormhole. Frank's jaw dropped as he stared at the phenomenon before him. A wormhole? How is that possible? Dr. Vex's fingers flew over his console, analyzing the data pouring in. It appears to be stable, he reported, his voice filled with awe. This is unprecedented. The implications for interstellar travel are... Before he could finish, a priority communication came through. A stern-faced Eliani appeared on the main screen. This is Ambassador Zan of the Galactic Council. We've detected a significant spatial anomaly in your system. Explain yourselves immediately. Frank stepped forward, his mind racing to process the situation. Ambassador Zan, this is Frank Saunders of Eden Prime. We've had an unexpected development in our Novum energy research. It appears we've created a stable wormhole. The ambassador's expression shifted from stern to astonished. A stable wormhole? That's impossible. With all due respect, Ambassador, Flora interjected, gesturing to the swirling vortex, it's very much possible. We're still assessing the situation, but we believe this could revolutionize galactic travel. Ambassador Zan's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of intense thought among the Eleni. The Council will want to investigate this personally. Expect a delegation to arrive within the week. In the meantime, secure that wormhole. We can't risk any unforeseen consequences. As the communication ended, Frank turned to his family and the research team. Well, he said with a wry smile, it looks like Eden Prime is about to become the center of attention again. Nova approached the wormhole, her hand outstretched. The Novum energy responded to her touch, the vortex shrinking and stabilizing further. Dad, Mom, she said, her voice filled with excitement and a hint of trepidation. I think this is just the beginning of something big. Frank and Flora shared a look, knowing their daughter was right. The accidental creation of this wormhole would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Eden Prime, but for the entire galaxy. As news of the wormhole spread, the colony buzzed with activity. Scientists from every corner of the galaxy clamored for access to the groundbreaking discovery. Political tensions began to simmer as Earth and Zephyria both asserted claims over the wormhole technology. Amidst the growing excitement and tension, Frank received a cryptic message from Zephyr, the progenitor leader. The balance shifts. We must speak soon. That evening, as Frank and Flora prepared for bed, they discussed the whirlwind of events. We need to stay ahead of this, Frank said, pacing the room. If we don't take control of the narrative, others will try to do it for us. Flora nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. We should organize a summit, she suggested. Bring together representatives from all the major galactic powers. We can present a united front and establish a framework for sharing this technology responsibly. Frank smiled, once again amazed by his wife's diplomatic instincts. That's brilliant, Flora. We'll start making arrangements first thing tomorrow. As they settled into bed, neither could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The wormhole discovery was about to catapult Eden Prime onto the galactic stage in ways they had never imagined, testing the limits of their abilities, their relationships, and their vision for a united future. Outside their window, the stars twinkled in the night sky, unaware of the momentous changes unfolding on the small colony below. Eden Prime stood on the brink of a new era, one that would reshape the very fabric of galactic civilization.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.